Good evening. Welcome to this evening's TI Technology webinar hosted by Texas Instruments, where we will take a look at part 2 of preparing grade 8 math students for Texas EOC. I see many of you are joining for the first time, so we'd like to offer a special welcome if this is your first T3 professional development webinar. We'd also like to thank everyone for completing the live survey on the right side of your screen. While Michael Houston is taking the week off to spend time with his family, I, Stacey Thibodeau, will be the moderator for this event. I'm a current teacher at Southside High School in Youngsville, Louisiana. I teach Chemistry 1 and Chemistry 2. And I use TI technology to assist my teaching, data collection, and modeling math concepts, linking them to science content. I'm happy to introduce tonight's panelists, Valerie Hudson and Monique Williams. Valerie is an educator with over 25 years of experience teaching middle and high school mathematics. Through her previous work with Texas Instruments Math Forward program and current activities as a consultant through the Texas Instruments Systemic in-school programs, Valerie loves to share her passion for technology as a vehicle for encouraging increased student achievement. Thanks for being with us tonight, Valerie.
Thank you, Stacey. Glad to be here.
Our second panelist tonight is Monique Williams. Monique is currently the K-12 Math Technology Integration Specialist in Fort Bend ISD, where she embeds opportunities in the math curriculum for teachers to use technology with students. Since joining the T3 community, she has assisted with the development and delivery of workshops and hosted many summer workshops. She recently spoke about the importance of building relationships as a 7-for-7 speaker at the Texas Instruments International Conference. Thanks for being with us tonight, Monique.
Thanks, Stacey, for the introduction. Glad to be here.
We're expecting a large crowd, so your audio is muted. Feel free to send questions to all panelists using the Q&A window on the right side of your screen. We'll also send general messages in the chat window. This session is being recorded, and as a reminder, we will provide a link to this event's certificate of attendance at the conclusion of the webinar. Once the recording is available, if you'd like to follow along with your handheld or software tonight, and we hope you will, we recommend doing this with the recording so you can download the activities and pause and rewind the recording as necessary. We don't expect you'll have any audio issues tonight, but in the event that you do, try selecting Communicate in the WebEx menu, Audio Broadcast, and then click Join. Monique, Valerie? Yes?
Yes.
Feel free to share your screen, Monique.
All righty. Thank you for joining us for the Texas Instruments EOC Exam Success, preparing algebra students for starting on day 1 with myself, Monique Williams, and Valerie Hudson.
Again, we're very happy to be with y'all and hope we can share some items that maybe you weren't aware of that you can use to help your students. So our objectives for today are to explore a variety of ways that TI graphing technology can help your students feel confident going into the Texas Algebra I EOC test. Everyone will receive strategies that hopefully will help your students to save time and avoid mistakes. You'll also leave with links to step-by-step tutorial guides to help you and your students make the most of graphing technology. And just so you're aware, the TI-Nspire CX, the new TI-Nspire CX2, and TI-83 Plus CE handhelds are all acceptable for use on the Texas EOC Grade 8 and Algebra I EOC exams. And we mentioned Grade 8 since a lot of Algebra I teachers, especially middle school, also teach Grade 8. There will be an opportunity for a participant to win a free registration to the T-Cube International Conference at the close of the webinar, so stay tuned.
Which is in Dallas this year.
Yes. So our first example here, we're calling an assessment example, because even though we will be showing some ideas or strategies that kids can use during a EOC test, doesn't mean that we're expecting teachers to teach shortcuts. And on the contrary, you're all the leaders of your classrooms, and so one way that you can grade to make sure that the students, even if they know little shortcuts, are still learning the math is to assess questions as this example shows. So the final answer is not the bulk of the points. So still expect students to show their work. And that way you know that they know the mathematics, even though they might use the calculator for checking their work or, again, during testing. But, of course, we definitely advocate for students showing work.
Okay, you can find exam resources on the Texas Instruments website. If you go to the Resources tab and you click on Test Preparation, you will see this page. When you click here where it says Prepare Your Calculators for the Test, you can download easy-to-follow instructions to clear and configure your TI technology prior to the testing. So you see all the different ones that they have available here. Okay. Also, here are tips for the TI-Nspire CX graphing calculator or the TI-84 CE Plus calculators. If you click on the little icon here, it will take you to some videos that will help discover great ways to save time and avoid mistakes. You can see those videos here. If you click here, you can download a best practices guide that has tips and tricks for the test success.
So for our first test strategy, we're going to go back to that initial example where, of course, we would expect our students to show their work. And we're going to show all of our examples with the TI-84 CE as well as with the Nspire, since different schools have different equipment. So if you are following along, as Stacy mentioned earlier, then please don't try to follow along now, but wait till the video recording comes out, and then by all means follow along with your handheld. So first thing we're going to do is go, like I said, we're going to go to the TI-84 CE, and we're going to enter that equation into y equals. So going to y equals, we have 8 times the quantity, 3 minus 2x. And of course, always with graphing situations, even though this problem didn't say anything about graphing, that is one of our strategies to graph whenever possible. But when in y equals, always check to make sure plots are off, and of course they are. So let's go ahead and press graph. And of course we have a graph. Now, since this problem asks for f of -1, negative 10, then what I want to do is on my table, I want to see negative 10. But sometimes the table might be such that the students would have to scroll, or maybe the value that we want the students to find isn't on the table. So it's good to know how to set our table. So as you see here, there's only one item in this table. So let's see how we got that. So if you'll go to second window, that is table set. And we can have our table start wherever we want. We can change our table by whatever increments for X we want. But if you'll notice there, our independent value is set to ask. And that's what we want in order to be able to enter any possible X value and get the corresponding Y value. So now our independent is set to ask. And so now when we go back to our table, of course, we could ask our table anything. So if we go down to the next spot, we could just type in any other value that might possibly be asked, like maybe 20 is asked for X. So we type 20, we press enter, and of course we have our result.
Okay. And to do, we have one more way to show this.
I'm sorry, I was going to go to the home screen and show just one other way. So if we go to the home screen, then since we entered our equation in Y1, we can recall Y1 right now. So if we'll press alpha and then trace, that's a little shortcut to pick up our Y variable. And we entered our information in Y1, so we'll just select that Y1. And then we wanted the X coordinate of negative 10, so we're typing negative 10, and our parentheses, press enter, and we have our result that way as well. So we have choices.
Okay, and now we will visit ways to explore this with the TI-Nspire. So one way it would be to define this in Y equals, just kind of like we did on the 84 just now, but we're going to do this from the home screen. And so let me put the emulator up, and we can simply type define, and notice how it's straightened up. That means it recognized that term or that command. We want to define f1 of x to be the problem, which is 8 times the quantity of 3 minus 2x and we will press enter. Notice it says done. So right now we have just defined f1 to be that equation. And just like Valerie did, we can recall f1 from this calculator screen by pressing control variable. I'm sorry, not control variable, just variable. And we can select F1, and we can type in negative 10. And so we know F1 of negative 10 is also 184. Now, if we wanted to be sure, we could go over to a graphs page. And if I push tab, notice that I'm already at F2. That means I already have an equation stored in F1. So when I arrow up, I see that F1 I just stored from the calculator page. So I'm going to press enter so I can see the graph. And then I could do the same thing with the table that we just did for the 84. Well, before I do that, let me try a different way with graph and trace. So if I press menu, and then I press 5 for trace, and then graph trace, I could simply type in negative 10 and push enter. And down here at the bottom, it tells me that my Y value is 184 when my X value was negative 10. Or like we did a second ago, I could add a table and change the table settings by going to Menu and Edit Table Settings. And just like we did a second ago, change this to Ask, where I could go now, make sure I'm in the X column, type in -10, and voila, same idea. But again, like Valerie said, we have many choices.
Right. And let me just mention one caveat to the graphing and table functions. If your students graph their equation in relation, they don't have access to the table. But what Monique just demonstrated as far as using the trace function and then typing in the value that they want, that absolutely works whether it's in the function mode or the relation mode on the Nspire.
Thanks, Val.
So far, we don't have any questions, so we'll just continue on. If you have questions, though, please don't hesitate to ask.
Hey,
So,
Valerie, Monique.
Yes.
Sorry, there was a question. It was in the Q&A window. One of the participants wanted to know what's the best way to teach proper in a formal way in order of operations. What's your experience in trying to work with students in teaching order of operations?
Well, I teach students just to know the just the protocol of order of operations, but they can also use the calculator and watch for patterning, because the calculator is going to use order of operations exactly. And when I say the calculator, I mean the TI calculators, because some four-function calculators do not.
Also, you could use it to disprove some of their misconceptions. So if they're thinking one way because they trust the calculator so much, or they tend to, you could use it to disprove some of their misconceptions they're having.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thanks for catching that, Stacy.
Thank you, guys.
Mm-hmm. All right. So for our next question, this would be one of the gridables. So one tool that we have, of course, is the calculator functions on both versions of our calculator. So for this question, what we're going to do is go to Math from the home screen, and all the way at the bottom, Numeric Solver, which is a very nice feature of the 84 Plus CE. So go ahead and we're going to go ahead and select that. And what we're going to do is, oh, it's already typed, very nice. We're going to type one side of our equation in E1 for equation 1, and the other side in E2 for equation 2. So since this question was asking for what value of B would the value of negative 25 have 1, 0, well, we already know that our x value has to be negative 25. And if we're looking for a 0, then our y, or f of x, has to equal 0. So one side of our equation, we have the 0, and then substituting for x, we have negative 25 on E2. And also notice that we have a B type. So if your student wanted to type a different letter, they could. I like for my students to be able to type whatever the question is giving them, so that their answer will look like what they want. So if you'll notice, in the bottom right-hand corner, we have a soft key. It says OK. So to access a soft key, we press the hard key directly below it. And so that would be graph. And basically, the calculator wants us to guess, but we don't have to. We could enter a value if we want. But when you press enter a second time, when you press graph a second time, then you will have your value, which in this case, our B value is 50.
Okay. For the TI-Nspire, it is very similar. If you are on a calculator page, I'll go ahead and clear this out. I go menu, actions, I can clear my history. And now I will use the same numeric solver by pushing menu and then algebra and then numerical solve. And just as Valerie said, I know that f of x has to be 0 because I'm looking for 0 values for 0. So I'll type in 0 equals and the equation, but instead of x, I'll put in the negative 25 to replace the x, plus b. I have to push the times symbol, and I put in the negative 25 again for x, plus 625. Now, the one catch with this that's a little different is once you finish typing in the full equation, you must press comma and then the variable that you are solving for, which in this case is b. And then I press enter, and it gives me the same 50 that we just saw with the TI-84. So 50 would be the x value, 50 would be the value of b, when negative 25 was the x value, give you a 0 for this equation. Any questions?
We have a couple of questions here.
Okay.
One person is asking, hold on, let me go back here. Can you please show how to transform a parent function, f of x equals ax plus b, to different forms on the calculator? And second person is asking, does a regular TI-84 not CE have a solver? So I'm going to start with that second answer, or second question. No, a regular TI-84, especially the black and white, do not have the N solver. And then for the first question about transforming on the calculator, hopefully we'll have time to get to that, but that can be done on the Nspire for sure.
Can you tell me again so I can just kind of jot that down as a mental note?
Sure.
For the N? Transform what?
It was, can you please show how to transform a parent function, f of x equals ax plus b, to different forms on the calculator?
Okay. All right.
So again, hopefully we'll have time before we finish to be able to show that.
Okay. The next question.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Here we go.
All right, so again, starting with the TI-84, a strategy is comparing what we are given to our answer choices. So first thing I'm going to do is store the two values that we are given here. So we're given 15/4 for y and 20 for x. So if we go to the home screen of our TI-84, we're going to start with our number. So our value for y is 15/4. I like my kids to use the vertical fraction so they don't get confused. So I'm going to press alpha F1 or alpha y equals and choose that first fraction template. And we're going to type 15 in the numerator and 4 in the denominator. And then we need to come out of the fraction, so we'll press the right arrow button. Next, I need to store, as I mentioned. So to store, there's an actual store button that's on your far left-hand corner close to the on button. And when you press store, you'll see a little arrow. Next, we're going to type the variable that we were told 15/4 is to represent, and that is y. So we'll press alpha and the number 1 because that's y. And press enter. So for our second store, we were told that the x value was 20. So we're going to, again, start with the value 20. We're going to press our store button, and we're going to type x. Now, you know there's two x's on the 84. There's x, the letter, and there's x that we use for graphing. It doesn't matter which one we use. And then we press enter. So going back to our answer choices, our first answer choice was y equals 300x. So that's exactly what we're going to type, because we have stored a value for y, we stored a value for x, and now we're looking for a truth statement. So we're going to type alpha 1 for y equals, which is a test feature. So if we'll press second math, we'll have our test. Of course, we want equals 300x. And of course, the same x that we used to store. And when we press enter, we have a 0. Well, this is Boolean logic. So a 0 in Boolean logic means not true. So that means A is not our answer. So now we're going to go to choice B. And there's different ways we can do it. We already have our first answer choice written, but if we want to copy and paste and then amend to match our second answer choice, then we can do it that way. So let's just amend. Press the up arrow twice, and that way this is the copy, and now we press enter for our paste. And now we'll just backtrack a little bit using our left arrow button, and we're going to delete, not clear, just delete until we have one term, because the next answer choice asks for 3/16 x. So if you do delete too much, then we can also insert. So if we press second and then delete, that will be our little insert. And again, I want a vertical fraction. So I'm going to type alpha y equals to get that fraction template. And I want the first one. And we have a 3 in the numerator, 16 in the denominator. And I'll come out completely out of the fraction and then press enter, and let's see what we get. And that is true. So if we had entered the other two answer choices, those would turn out to be 0. So our answer is truly the second answer choice. So we are comparing what we're given to our question answer choices and seeing which one gives a true statement.
Okay, on the Nspire, oh, sorry, Valerie, go ahead.
I was just going to say, on the older versions of the TI-84, you have that feature as well.
Okay. On the Nspire, we have the same options. We could store the values in just like you just saw, but the fraction feature is here if you push Control Divide, and you would type 15/4 and come out of the fraction. The store key here is the second feature of the variable key. So you push Control and variable, and you get the same type of arrow. And you would store that for y. So y is down here. You press enter. Same idea. You can store 20 for x by pressing the same keys, but you press x instead of y. And then you could type in the equation just as we saw with the 84. So if you type y equals 75x, you will get an actual false word instead of the Boolean logic like you do with the 84 with the zeros and ones. You get true or you get false. Just like we did with the other one, we could go here and copy and paste, bring that down. Notice that the y and x are bold, which again means the calculator recognizes those because we've already defined those or stored something in there. So if I backspace and I want to change this to the correct answer choice, which was 3/16, I can type in the the numerator and the 16 here, and you see that I get true. One other way that we could do this is from the graph. Let me clear out this graph. I will go up and I can delete this stuff and press enter. I want a standard window, so I'm pressing menu to go window, and I'm going to set it back to the standard window we started with. And I'll press tab to get the equation bar back up. And if I wanted to check, I could type in the equation. One of the answer choices was D, 16/3 x. So again, if I press Control Divide and push the 16/3 and x, I should come out of the fraction first. That's very important because that's a different equation. And then go to the table. I can get that by pushing Control T. I get these various values. Now I'm looking specifically for when x is 20. So if you guys recall from our first problem, we can set the table to be ask for the independent. And if I'm in the x column, when I press 20, if it's the correct equation, I should get the equivalent of 15/4, which is 3.75. And I get 106. So I would know that that's the incorrect answer. But I can quickly change that. Double click here and change my equation to the correct one, which was 3/16. It's not going. I could do 3/16 x. Oh goodness. Sorry guys.
I think you just needed that vertical fraction in there.
I know, it's giving me grief.
Yeah, and kids do that all the time, y'all.
Let's just erase this whole thing here. And I could type it in here, 3/16. And then when I go here, I can select, come on, my F1. And I can see that I get the 3.75.
That's really nice that we can change our equation on the Nspire, whether we're in a graph page or we're in the table. Just wherever we need to change it, we can change it.
Okay.
Okay, there was a question. Let me go back. There was a question about the truth statements on the 83 plus, and yes, that is a feature there as well. And then Cindy has a question about the drop-down box in the chat, so I'm not sure what the answer to that one is. Going back to the 83 plus idea, you should have a store feature. Unfortunately, I don't have a TI-83 in front of me, but you should have a store feature on that handheld as well, and you should be able to enter the same information as we just did. Okay, so next we have a table. And since this is Algebra 1, we all know that students need to be able to identify if they have linear data or if they have quadratic data or if they have exponential data. And a lot of students just jump to, oh, I see a table, it's got to be linear, which of course is not always the case. So what I always want my students to do, you have a table, they're not giving you any information, whether it's linear or not, let's graph it. So we're going to enter our values in stat edit. And this is going to go in list 1 and list 2.
So I have entered the data for you in L1 and L2 to save a little bit of time. You can see that you have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 here, and 4, 12, 36, 108, and 324.
Perfect. So now we're going to graph that information, but of course we always have to turn our plots on. So we're going to go to second y equals, to turn our plots on. And we want to make sure we're selecting of course, turn the plot on there. We want to select the scatter plot, that first one. And we want to make sure the X list is L1 and the Y list is L2. Of course, we would have conversations with the kids about which is dependent on which, but for interest of time, L1 is X list and L2 is Y list. And kids can pick whichever method they want to mark their point. I prefer the square. Great. And I always have the kids go to y equals because I don't want them to have any confusing equations that are graphed with their scatter plot. So let's go to y equals. Oh, look, there's an equation. So let's clear that. Wonderful. All right, so now we're going to go to graph. And we don't see too much. And so at this point, I know some people like to jump right into Zoom Stat, but I don't in the whole teaching process because I want my kids to be able to talk about, well, what is a reasonable domain? What's a reasonable range? And so we would have that conversation as far as what would we need for our axes values so that we'll be able to see what we want graphed. So looking back at our data, probably a minimum value for X of maybe -1 would be helpful. That way we can make sure that we see our 0 X value. So something a little bit smaller than 0 for X, something a little bit larger than 4 for X for our max. So maybe from -1 to +5. Again, the kids would be having this conversation in a just a learning situation. And then for our Y minimum, we would want something a little smaller than 4. So again, maybe -1, and something a little bit larger than 324, maybe 350 or so, and then changing the X and Y scales accordingly. Now, in a testing situation, absolutely going to Zoom Stat is perfectly fine, but I was talking about in teaching so that the kids have that reinforcement of what's a viable domain and range for their situation. So now if we go to our graph, then we can see, oh, definitely not linear. So looking at the graph, the kids might think, okay, well, it's a quadratic or half a quadratic. So I would have them test because we're not really sure, is it half a quadratic? Is it exponential? I would have them use both of those regressions. So we're going to Stat, arrow over to Calc. We have quadratic regression, and further down we have the exponential. So if we pick quadratic, of course we want the L1 and L2. I want to store this equation to see if it actually makes sense. And again, that shortcut to pull up the equation is alpha F4 or alpha trait. And we're going to store it. There's nothing in Y1, so let's store it there. And we'll go down to calculate. So we have our regression equation. Go to y equals. Then we can see it's there. So now let's go to the home screen and see if that equation for y1 made any sense with this particular problem. So for this problem, we wanted the number of rabbits after 9 months. So since that equation was stored in y1, we're going to pull up that y1 again with alpha F4 or alpha trait. And in parentheses, we're going to have 9.
Did you say 9?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And enter. And we have 2,169. So looking at the answer choices, we're really not close. Well, I guess we're close to one of them, but we're not as close as we really need to be able to make a viable determination. So maybe it's not a quadratic regression. So let's go back. So we're going to this time do a exponential regression. So we're going to over to calc. And this time we're going to, you can either press the up arrow to get closer to the bottom or the down arrow and just keep scrolling until you get to exponential regression. And same idea, we want our list 1 and list 2, but this time I want to store the regression equation in y2 so I can have a comparison. So we're going to press alpha trait and select y2, and we'll calculate that. Great. So now we're going back to our home screen, and we're going to type alpha trait and pull up y2. And in parentheses, we want a 9 in parentheses, and we'll press enter. And we have 78,732, which is exactly choice B. So students need to be able to recognize that just because the graph looks a certain way doesn't necessarily mean it's what they're thinking. And they also need to graph for sure.
Okay, we can follow the same types of procedures from here where we could, let's clear out some of this, get this table off of here, just have a graph. So if we go to a list and spreadsheets page, I have already typed in the data with the correct headings for time and population, and the data is here. If I want to view that data, I could then go over here and I have to click to add the variable. So time is my independent variable, and you see the data points move. And then population is my dependent variable. And just like we saw with the 84, it is not linear. So then we have some choices for regression. We could run it from right here within this screen by going menu and analyze, and then choose 6. Uh-oh, just kidding, it went too fast. Menu, analyze, 6 for regression, and we could choose quadratic. And you can see it's kind of close, but a little bit off. Or we can choose, again, menu, analyze, regression, and go down to 8 for exponential. And you can see that that's a little bit better fit. So visually, here on the Nspire, it's a little easy to see that probably the exponential regression may be better. So knowing that, if I go back to my List and Spreadsheets page. I could run the regression from within here by pushing Menu and Statistics, Stat Calculations. And again, because I think exponential is better, I can choose A for exponential. Okay, right here where it's asking me the X list, if I just click on this right arrow, then I have choices. My X list is time, and then my Y list would be population, and that's also because I've already entered those into the list and spreadsheet, so it recognizes those same titles from the list and spreadsheet. It says here that we're going to save the regression equation. It says in F2 because remember I probably already have something in F1, so it goes to the next available equation slot that's open, and then I can just press OK. So I can see here my A value would be this, my B value would be this, and remember I put that in F2. So again, if I go back to the calculator page, all of these pages are linked. So if I press variable, I have this F2 variable here, which would be the regression equation I just stored. And like Valerie tested a second ago, we push F2 of 9, press enter, and you see that you get 73,000. My data must be a little bit off. That's pretty close to what you should have on your answer choice for B. If you were to try a different one, you could, the quadratic you saw was way off. Okay. Any questions so far?
No.
All right.
All right. So let's go on to the next section, which is talking about various activities on the TI website. So an 84 activity, and again, this comes from TI-84 Central, is called Manual Fit. And basically with this activity, students are given a set of data similar to what we just used. In this case, it turns out to be quadratic, and students type in different values for A, H, and K in a quadratic general equation and try to fit their equation to data. And they also, as they are fitting their equation to data, they come up with what's reasonable, and they also have some extensions that they can look at, as well as some domain constraints. So there's a little piecewise element thrown in as well.
Hey, Valerie, what's that QR code for?
That QR code takes them right to that particular activity if they want to take a look at it.
Okay. And we have,
go ahead.
You had something to say?
No, I was going to say if we have time to actually do part of that activity, then we will. But I know time is running out, so go ahead.
Okay, so we have a math-inspired activity that you can also find on the Texas Instruments website. And this does not necessarily teach, much like that manual fit doesn't, not necessarily a tip or a trick, but could help solidify the idea of the correlation coefficient. So in this activity, you can see on that screenshot right there, it leads students through investigating the connection between scatter plots, the data point scatter plots, and the correlation coefficient numerical value. So it begins with two screens like this, and they're kind of looking at the correlation coefficient and looking at how the graphs appear. And then it moves them through some other choices to like the next problem where you would see graphs like this. There would be two graphs, and you would have to guess which one had the stronger correlation coefficient. and then moving along to eventually being given a set of data as a scatter plot and given a target coefficient, correlation coefficient, and students would have to try to move or manipulate the scatter plot to reach the correlation coefficient target. And then eventually it moves into a connection between what is the significance of the correlation coefficient being a 1 or a -1, and the relationship between the two when that happens. And it starts leading into a little bit about inverse functions near the end. But it's a pretty nifty activity for students to explore and kind of solidify their thinking or their learning around correlation coefficient and the numerical value. And that QR code also takes you directly to the activity. If we have a quick second, I will show you on the website where you can find that really quick. So on the website, if you just go to activities, you can go to 84 Central or Math-Inspired, and that's where you can find the two activities we just talked about. Okay. Any last questions?
There was that previous question about doing transformations of functions, specifically transformation of a linear function. So can you show that on the Inspire, Monique?
Okay, do you just mean like with a slider?
Yes.
Okay. So if I'm on the graph, I have it said linear parent function, didn't it?
Yes.
So I will just go ahead and double click this so I can change it very quickly to the linear parent function, which is just f of x equals x. Okay. And so I can do this a number of ways. I could, okay, I'm trying to think in terms of testing purposes. It would probably be best to add a slider, right?
Yep.
So I can add, I can reference this one in here by pushing variable and choosing F1 and say, well, let me put it in front. I could do A times F1 of X. And it says, hey, do you want to create a slider for A? Because it doesn't recognize A as a variable that it can graph. It only recognizes X's and Y's. So I'll say, yes, go right ahead. And it gives me the slider table here, the menu, and I can set that in place. And as I move the slider, then you can see that that changes. One of the new features that's pretty cool about the software, notice that this is a static A here. When I have a slider on the new premium software, if I right-click here and go to attributes, I can change. Notice it says show names for the parameters. If I click that arrow right to the side, it now says show values. So you notice that because my slider is a -1, it has -1 times F1 of 20. Or if I move it, the A value changes in the equation as I move the slider. And I could have put the plus D, or I could have put the C or B, depending on which transformation I was trying to show. But I just went ahead and did A because it was the easiest. Is that
Very
good?
nice. Very nice.
Okay. So the
Now,
last thing is, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, all of the activities that we have shown you, as well as the strategies, are part of a larger workshop that Monique and I have developed, and it's a 1-day or 2-day workshop. Those are the various titles, and if you're interested in receiving any more information about either of these, then you can contact your TI representative, either Carissa Schulte or Rob Wilson, and they'll give you more information.
All righty. And with that, we will turn it back over to Stacy.
All right, thank you, ladies. That was amazing. I actually learned some information that I'm hoping I can bring back to my chemistry classroom as far as some data analysis. And we are entering the end of tonight's webinar, so make sure you use the chat window or Q&A window to ask Monique and Valerie if you have any last minute questions. We do have some upcoming webinars. You can always sign up for them just like you did tonight at education.ti.com for webinars. And as mentioned earlier, Monique and Valerie said that we would have a drawing for someone to get a free registration to the next Texas Instruments International Conference. It's going to be in Dallas, March 13th through the 15th. And the winner is Manuel Hayashi. So congratulations, Manuel. We will be in touch with you via email over the next couple of days. And we hope to see you as well as anyone else who might be interested in learning more about the technology, both with the 84CE and the Nspire that the two ladies presented tonight. It'll be a great time to see it in action and getting some more hands-on information. We also would like for you to try to stay connected with social media with TI. There's Facebook, Twitter. I know I use Twitter a lot, so do Valerie and Monique, as far as getting the word out there, what we're doing with students, what we're doing with teachers. And then there's also some great YouTube videos that can show you how to use some of the technology, like presented tonight, and then possibly some others.
Hey, Stacy.
Yeah.
There was one question that is asking, is there a code for the TI contest?
The contest, I'm not sure.
I'm assuming I think there's a teacher one and a spread the math contest they may be asking about.
I'm not sure about the...
Can that
Valerie?
person be a little bit more specific about what they mean by code?
If the person was discussing or asking a question about the winner of the drawing tonight, we will actually contact you via email and give you more information how to do the registration. I did post in the chat window a certificate of attendance. If you click on that link, type in your name, and it will give you the information about the webinar tonight. You can print that for your records. I also attached a link for the documents that were used tonight. In a few days, you'll also receive a follow-up email that will have the links to those as well. Thank you, Monique. Thank you, Valerie, for your presentation tonight. Thank you all for logging on and giving us some ways to get our students to be more successful on the Texas end-of-course exams, but also being able to do some problem solving for real-world applications.
Thank you. To share.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Hope everyone has a great night. Thank you.